live streamed. Okay.
Mhm. I'm recording and I'm live streaming.
So
So
this means people can watch it on YouTube
They'll be able to,
now.
yeah, they can watch
Live?
it on YouTube now, live, yeah. And then it will go into the archives. We're only keeping it up for 2 weeks. That was what you requested. I didn't realize I was in charge of that, so now it's been done. Now I know that I'm in charge. It's been
Okay.
done.
It comes under the category and other duties as specified.
Apparently. But they have to tell me
Or
that I'm
not
in charge.
specified.
Right, right.
It's like setting up the video and the sound for Oh My. I didn't realize that was part of my duties. Now I know, like now it is. Yeah. So
This is a challenge we have in many forms.
it's part of it's just part of what we do now, right?
Yeah. But, communication.
Yeah.
Well, while there's a void, I will say that this has been much more informative last night and so far today than I guess I expected. I've really learned so much. It's been so interestingly done.
Thank you.
So glad we did this.
Yeah. So let me begin. People will be coming in during my introduction, but that's okay because, it's just me. And some people will already have heard the introduction. Welcome back. This is our third part of our Scholar in Residence weekend. And once again, this afternoon, we are going to be hearing from Rabbi Mary Zamore. And this time on the impact and challenges to the ongoing revolution of women in the Rabbinate. For those of you who might be here for the first time this afternoon, Rabbi Zamore is the executive director of the Women's Rabbinic Network, which is a partner organization of the Reform Movement. And for over 40 years, the Women's Rabbinic Network has worked to narrow the wage gap and create safer, respectful Jewish communities and promote equity for all. Rabbi Zamore is the co-leader of the Reform Pay Equity Initiative and heads Women Rabbinic Network's Clergy, Safe Employees and Employers program, which focuses on creating a harassment-free Jewish community. She's editor of 2 books, The Sacred Exchange, Creating a Jewish Money Ethic, and The Sacred Table, Creating a Jewish Food Ethic. Both the latter designated a finalist by the National Jewish Book Awards. Were both of them designated for that, Mary, or no? Just the
first.
And she's here as we are promoting this book called The Sacred Calling, which you've had a link to, which is about 4 decades of women in the Rabbinate. We are celebrating, of course, the end of the 5th decade of women in the Rabbinate, as you know, because Rabbi Prezand joined us last night. And we are so fortunate to have Rabbi Zamore here again this afternoon. So once again, I'm going to highlight Rabbi Zamore and hand it over to her.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with everyone. And this morning and last night was a lot of fun. Looking forward to this next part. The Sacred Calling, by the way, was a National Jewish Book Award winner, but not the Sacred Exchange. So let's continue. Let me share my screen, and we're going to pick up our narrative, and we're going to get a little bit more activist in this half. Oops, I don't think I just gave it the wrong screen. Hold on. Let me try that again. Whoops. Technology is so much fun.
It's still going live to YouTube. I just wanted to stop the recording.
Okay, so here we are. And we'll get on the big picture. Okay. Okay, so here we are. Let me show you this neat tool. Jewish Women's Archives. It did not do what it was supposed to do. Let me go back and see if this will open. I know where it is. Okay. So Jewish Women's Archives, which is such a gem. If you don't know about this website and all the work they do, please make sure you take some time to explore. So I want to just show you something interesting. They have this interactive timeline, as I said, and we've been exploring everything on the other side of this timeline, this nice timeline at 1972. And we're now going to explore everything in front of it. And when you push on, one of these names, you get a quick profile. So for instance, in the video that we saw that was from the, oh my gosh, heart-wrenching visit to memorialize Rabbi Jonas, Jackie Tabak spoke. And she is, as you can see here, is ordained by Leo Beck College in 1975, making her the first woman rabbi in Great Britain, as it says here, but also, the second in Europe after Rabbi Jonas. And can I tell you, when our European colleagues talk about women in the rabbinate, the reverence with which they speak about Rabbi Tabak is really beautiful. It's poignant. It really is. So you can go through, and certainly Rabbi Joseph and I, when we look at this timeline, we see our colleagues and friends and heroes. And this is what we're going to be exploring in part. I wish we could look at every one of these names this afternoon. So I'm just going to show you how amazing this is. And just to remind you, in terms of the historical backdrop, we talked about first wave feminism being around suffrage. We talked about second wave feminism in the 1960s and 70s. And scholars talk about third and fourth wave feminism. Third wave feminism starting in the 1990s, which is a more nuanced feminism that is about identity and the individual, and is really a critique of the last two waves of feminism being a white upper class movement for women, and trying to expand that appropriately. And fourth wave is associated with the social media era and the Me Too movement. And in some ways, we live out the values and build on the values of each of these waves, because none of the work is completely done. So we're still working towards those goals at the same time. So you can see all these fabulous names. But for now, we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. And we are going to start back with Sally Presand. And I wanted to share an anecdote that did not come out in Rabbi Presand's presentation, and did not come out this morning in our road to the Rabbinate. So many years ago, when I was a rabbinical student, Hebrew Union College at the time would do, they still do all sorts of publicity work, but back then it was all on paper. And they created some sort of small booklet to invite people to be excited about Hebrew Union College and their many, many important programs. And on the cover of this little booklet, they had a picture of two rabbis. In fact, I know who they are. And they were at their ordination in front of Temple Emmanuel in New York City. And they're in their academic robes, and they have their taluses over the academic robe, and they both are holding their open smicha, their ordination document, below their chins, so that their faces are shown, and they're next to each other. And it's interesting because they both have like dark curly hair and short haircuts. They're both of equal heights, and here they are with these two documents. And my husband, I was a younger student. I was still in seminary. I was looking forward to being ordained, I think in, about 2 or 3 years. They were ahead of me. Maybe this was even your classmates, Linda, Rabbi Joseph. And so my husband looks at this picture, and it's a tiny picture. And he says, "Why are their documents different?" Now, he just saw from the outline of the lettering that it didn't match up. He wasn't looking at the words. And I said, "Gee, I don't know." And And so I kind of held on to that for a very long time. And somewhere along the line, I discovered that indeed he was correct, that the language on the ordination document for men and women was different. And this difference had one very important difference, and then some other differences that were actually not as important. The difference was in the way the rabbi is addressed, like the actual title given to the rabbi. And for men, it's Moratenu Harav, our teacher, our rabbi. And for women, now I have to remember what it says. Oh my goodness, I have an article about this I wrote. It did not say the same term. The same term was, this is a term that goes back to early medieval times, and is, I showed you that text this morning, the chain of passing of the privilege of preserving Judaism and the rabbinic chain. And this term is now, considered to be part of that rabbinic chain to get this title, the laying on the hands of ordination. This is what we've been talking about all morning, the moment in 1972 when this is actually done, the moment in 1935 when it is done very quietly, but done. So this title is very important. So you will notice that all the pictures of Rabbi Presand, as you can see here, this is not actually at her ordination. When we talk about her ordination, people usually show this picture or one from the same photo shoot. She has told me that this is not from her ordination. You would think it is because she's holding a Torah. During our ordinations, we never hold the Torah, but it is actually from her student pulpit. This is not from her ordination. There are pictures of her at her ordination, and in fact, that moment when she's actually ordained. But the thing you will never see is a picture of Rabbi Presand holding her ordination document, her smicha. And this is different than just a mere, certificate. It is a certificate, but notice I'm calling it a smicha. This is not just piece of paper, okay, mazel tov. This is signed by your teachers, and it bestows this title and documents that laying on of hands. When this weird mix that we have in the modern seminary of an academic institute and a religious ordination. And so she has told me the story. I did some research, and as I mentioned, I've written an article about this, and it's in the Sacred Calling, that on the day of her ordination came, they had no document to hand to her, so they handed her an empty tube. The documents are handed, after you're ordained, in a tube, but hers was actually empty. All the men, the 35 men, received the actual document. And the reason why hers was empty, if you remember, the faculty had been arguing for decades and decades about this. And when they finally decided to ordain her, they never were able to come to agreement about what her document would say. And they were uncomfortable, in fact, calling her Rav, which is the Hebrew for rabbi, because she is a woman. They did not want to call her the same title. And in my article, I bring forward the documents from the American Jewish Archives. We don't have all of the documents, unfortunately, unless they're hidden somewhere in some pile in the archives, which is always possible. Maybe one day scholars will have these materials and be able to tell a fuller story. But we have some of the memos that went among the faculty members and some of the suggestions and some of their objections to a woman receiving the same verbiage. And so in 2012, I petitioned HUC over several years. I was not the first woman to do this at all. At least 2 other women have done this before me. But I was the one who was successful. And today, the ordination document has been changed. Women, in fact, have the choice of being called Rav or Rabbah, which Rabbah is now the female term for female rabbi. But everything else now is equal in these documents. And interestingly enough, our colleague and the great scholar, Rabbi Devorah Weisberg, who is the dean of all the rabbinical programs across America, and at the LA campus. She's been tasked with writing a non-binary version because this is going to be the first year that a non-binary person will be ordained. At least the fact when they're ordained, they are upholding a non-binary identity. So interesting evolution. But for now, let's look at all these exciting firsts. So, of course, 1972, we know. 1974, Sandy Sasso, from those of you who were with me this morning, you remember her from that video. First woman ordained in the Reconstructing movement. The Reconstructionist movement recently renamed themselves in the last 5 years. They're now known as Reconstructing. And interestingly enough, Rabbi Sasso and Rabbi Presand were in school at the same time, parallel. She in Philadelphia, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College opened in 1969. And it opened with the intent to fully ordain women, by the way, but it took till 1974 till somebody was actually ordained. So it was never really a discussion in that movement, which is quite laudatory. Rabbi Sasso, by the way, is, I brought the idea to her and she embraced it fully. She is a fabulous author of children's literature, many award-winning books. If you have a child in your life, I highly recommend these picture books. She did one on Regina Jonas. She did one on Judy Kaplan, who was the first bat mitzvah. And she is now doing one on Sally Presand, and it will be out by June. And it's called Sally Opened Doors. Now we come to Cantor Ostfeld, rather. She is the first cantor in the world, not really America. This list is taken from when they're in black, they're from Hebrew Union College's website. When they're in blue, I've added them. And the black ones are the Reform movement. Cantor Ostfeld, we're going to hear a little bit from her later on in another section of this presentation. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But for the Reform movement, the issue of Kol Isha, voice of a woman, was not really an issue. In the Orthodox or halachic world, even the conservative world, the idea of hearing a woman sing, including singing prayer, is a religious issue. For Reform Jews, we dispensed with that, upholding this mitzvah, this commandment, early on. And so this was not really the issue with ordaining cantors. Again, that was more of a sociological problem than a spiritual, halachic, legalistic, Jewishly legalistic issue. But unfortunately for Rabbi Amy Alberg, her ordination of the conservative movement took all the way to 1985 at JTS on the Upper West Side. And the issue behind her ordination was truly a halachic Jewish legal issue. In fact, the conservative movement belaboredly and pretty contentiously argued this issue, believe it or not, all the way from the 1970s, early 1970s, 72 to 1985, when she is finally ordained. It is only in, they made the ruling in 1983 that she could be ordained, or any woman could be ordained. And of course, then it took her the additional years to finish the coursework. The reason why it did not take the full 6 years between when they allowed her to enter the program and to finish the program, but only took this brief window of less than 2 years, is because in the early 80s, late 70s, there were women who were in the programs at JTS, just as we described this morning, and the other programs of CCAR, HUC, and JIR, that were waiting in the wings in the hope that the change would be made. And it's actually quite poignant, because when you think about, the fact that Rabbi Eilberg was able to be ordained and to be that first woman, she, I believe, may have even earned a doctorate while waiting. I know at the very least a master's degree and many years of graduate school. But there were other women who, in the hope, in this huge window when they were debating of over 10, 11 years, that were hoping they would be the one allowed into the final stages of the rabbinical program. They took every other class that they were allowed to take, often earning master's degrees, doctorates, and beyond, in the hope that they would be the one, and ultimately had to give up, leave school, and build careers in other ways. So, there's a whole generation of women, both in both the reform and conservative movements, who really were robbed of the opportunity to be a rabbi when they really dreamed of it and just weren't allowed to. And in fact, over the course of my career, especially in the early days, I would meet women, not on a regular basis, but even in my first congregation, I had a member who had studied at HUC in the hope that she would be allowed to become a rabbi and wasn't allowed, and really was quite embittered by that. Really, she served as a Jewish educator who whole life was very, very learned. And she was so saddened by the fact that she never became a rabbi, because that was stolen from her. 1992, the first woman rabbi in the state of Israel, Naama Kalman. Then this is where things get interesting. This morning I was asked about women in the Orthodox movement. So here we go. Here's the answer. So Mimi Fagelson was ordained by Shlomo Carlebach in Jerusalem in 1994 in a private ordination. Now, you'll notice throughout all my presentations that I make a difference between private and public ordination. When you hear private versus public, you may think secret, and we're actually getting to a secret story in a moment. But what the difference really is the difference between this hybrid, which is a post-enlightenment hybrid of graduate school and religious ordination, yeshiva. And so when we talk about public ordination, it means that you apply to a program, you go through an academic program, and at the end you were ordained, and you usually leave also with academic degrees. Rabbi Joseph and I received a master's degree on our way to be ordained. But private ordination means but studying privately with a particular person, usually a charismatic figure or someone who is leading some sort of yeshiva setting. And then at the end of that course of study, which is not a predetermined number of years, but when they think you are ready, then they ordain you. This is interesting that Mimi Fagelson, who is a renewalist rabbi, which is a offshoot of the Reconstructionist movement, and now stands on its own, was ordained by Shlomo Carlebach, who is part of the Neo-Hasidic movement, himself descending from Hasidic dynasty. But I will also mention, of course, that Shlomo Carlebach in his own right is a very controversial figure in the Jewish community. Of course, a groundbreaker in terms of Neo-Hasidism, rekindling the ashes that were imported out of Europe into America of the Hasidic shtetl world, and bringing it into the 60s and 70s, and a nice mashup of the movement of what was happening there, but also very well documented allegations of sexual abuse, and therefore very tricky figure in our community to navigate, but important in this regard. 2006, my college classmate, I went to Columbia, and Chaviva Ner David was at Barnard. Unfortunately, I don't recall her at the time, and I really wish I had come in more contact with her. Now this is interesting. This is truly interesting. She says she was ordained. The rabbi who ordained her will not use the word ordination, but the description that he uses to say what he did in giving her the imprint of saying, yes, you have studied, you have a knowledge level and a place in the Jewish community, is what any of us would call ordination. And yet he publicly has refused to call it ordination. So she continues to call herself rabbi. Most of us believe she deserves that title and has received it. And she has since left Orthodoxy and now calls herself a post-denominational rabbi. I will mention she just wrote a highly acclaimed novel reflecting on Palestinian-Israeli relations, and also has a memoir among some other books that are quite worthy. 2006, HUC ordained the first transgender rabbi. And now back to Orthodoxy. 2009, Rabbah Sarah Hurwitz is ordained by Rabbi Avi Weiss. At the time, he did not give her the title of rabbi or rabbah in Hebrew because of how controversial this was in the Orthodox movement. She studied at Yeshivat Drisha, which is on the Upper West Side. It was founded in the late 80s, 90s. And she sat for years and years in intensive Talmud study, responsa, all sorts of rabbinic texts. At the end of that, Rabbi Weiss tested her and ordained her. But they came up with the new acronym, Maharat, because he did not want to use the title rabbi because it was too inflaming in the Orthodox community. The year after, together, they found Yeshivat Maharat, which is a yeshiva only for women with the intent of ordaining women rabbis. And over the last 10 plus years, they have ordained on a regular basis a small class of anywhere from 3 to 5 women every single year. And so they have a growing number of women who are rabbis. Some of them use the title Maharat, some of them use Rav, and some of them use Rabbah, just to confuse all of us. I've had the pleasure of teaching at Yeshivat Maharat, of bringing the safe space training to them and working with cohorts of their rabbis to navigate the sexism that they face, just as women rabbis in all movements do. And I have to tell you, they are rock stars. They are really amazing, amazing rock star rabbis. They are so learned. And as Rabbi Present described, that drive that I have to be better than anybody else, lest anybody say, my ordination was not deserved. You can tell that that's what they're functioning under. And it saddens me because it's like watching history repeat itself with their rabbis. Sometimes people saying, yes, we'll accept you. And then the next week they no, we won't accept you. This organization is going to make a proclamation against the whole idea, time and time again, and the hurdles that they're having to jump over, and the communities that will and will not accept them, and the struggles they're having to obtain appropriate pay and other things. So it really does sadden me, and I'm glad that our rabbis can support them in any little ways that we can. 2009, HUC ordained the first African American, also a woman, by the way, Elisa Stanton. I just happened to speak to her this past week. And 2017, they ordained the 100th Israeli Reform Rabbi, just that means of any gender. But by the way, she was a woman. And I brought this because there are so many amazing women coming out of that program. And what is interesting is the Jerusalem campus, the Israeli program of the Reform movement, you should all know that so many of these rabbis are women. They are true chalutzot. They are pioneers. They are creating from scratch liberal Jewish Reform communities where there've been no congregation. It's not that they are going into positions where they're have been established congregations for generations like we have the luxury of doing. They're literally hitting the ground throughout Israel, and just gathering people organically around them and saying, let's have services, let's do the holiday together. And slowly they build and build. The next thing they rent a space. The next thing they're petitioning the government for a mobile kind of building space. The next thing they're getting a permanent space. And we're watching Israel flourish in, with Reform Judaism. And much of it is being driven by women. And I will just add, amazingly underpaid women. Okay. So I talked about both of these women. And I see in my notes, I did not say what Maharat stands for. You might be wondering what that weird little acronym that was created just for the moment is Manhiga Hilchati Ruchanit Torati. Meaning a female leader of Jewish law, spirituality, and Torah. They literally, remember my original question this morning, what does a rabbi do? Well, that's their answer. Their answer is we teach Jewish law, we have spirituality, and of course Torah, and of course a few other things, including running Zoom calls and putting the recordings into the YouTube. Okay, so now we continue our journey. Let me just reorganizing all the things I've opened on my computer. Okay, so what is a first? What exactly is a first? I gave a little, when I was pitch hitting last night in the unintended break we have, Hafsakah, during Rabbi Prieson's presentation, Rabbi Joseph and I started to talk about this idea of a first. And, as you saw in that beautiful timeline from the Jewish Women's Archives, we could go through and there are just dozens and dozens of documentation of firsts, and in the Sacred Calling, there's a whole section at the beginning of the book of firsts that are women who self-reported first, to say, well, I was the first rabbi in my congregation who was a woman. I was the first woman who was pregnant during ordination. I was the first woman to serve in this branch of the military. I was the first woman to give the blessing at Congress, like whatever that first is. And each of those, yes, should be celebrated. But as I said last night, in some ways, here we are 50 years later, and we're still having those first moments. So I'm going to put Rabbi Joseph on the spot and say, I remember at the beginning of my rabbinate, people would come up to me all the time and say that they've never met a woman rabbi before. But it surprises me, it still happens.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, no, that happens all the time. You do a wedding and people come up to you afterwards and they say, I've never seen a woman rabbi before. You did a lovely job at the wedding, or, and they ask all sorts of questions, or at bar and bat mitzvahs. And and there are still people that doubt that women can be a rabbi. And I think we still hear that. I've had bar mitzvah parents say to me, we like you very much, but can we have the rabbi that was in the congregation, that used to be in the congregation, who is male, come back and do the bar mitzvah, right? Because my family have never seen a woman rabbi and they're not going to accept this as a real ceremony.
Yes, that happens all the time still. And of course, our Israeli colleagues have that like hourly, not even daily, hourly. But yes, it is surprising here in North America that still happens. It's funny, I did a wedding, you reminded me, I did a wedding 2 years ago now. It was before the pandemic, so like 2.5 years ago. And it was, the groom had grown up in the conservative movement. The bride chose Judaism and converted, and they decided to affiliate Reform. And so I did the wedding. And in fact, a friend of mine wasn't available and had recommended me. I don't usually do weddings because I do, nonprofit work. And so, we worked together for many months and weeks with the premarital counseling and all the preparations. And I got to the wedding, and the groom had a very large family. And most of them were really quite right-wing conservative Jews. And person after person after person after the ceremony came up to me to thank me, to say it was beautiful, and to say with such great surprise that they never thought such a wedding could be done by a woman.
Right.
And in fact, I even got one job offer that evening. It was very funny. Someone came up to me and said their congregation was looking for a new rabbi, and she never thought that they should look at women, but maybe I wanted to apply. So I thought that was very funny.
Yeah.
So I think that truism that whenever we're in front of anybody, in some ways, in that moment, they have to decide whether or not they're going to accept you, no matter what your gender, as their rabbi. And for some it truly is novel, and for some it is hard won for them to adjust. And that road was very, very hard. So I want to tell you a little bit about what our movement did to help the women, because great fanfare is made of the first. And so, Rabbi Presand shared that anecdote about being on the airplane and the press conference at the airport. And wow, I've never heard that story before. That's one of the few stories I've never heard before. And you may not know, and she did not mention, that even when she applied and got into HUC, that her local hometown paper in Cleveland reported on that and reported that she would be the first woman rabbi, even though they had not yet decided that they'd ordain her. And she was like 16 at the time. Talk about pressure. The reason, by the way, that she was at HUC so young is during that time period, in the baby boomer period from post-war on, there, as I mentioned before, there was quite a shortage of rabbis in America. And one of the things that the reform movement did to try to alleviate and to create more pipeline to more rabbis is they did a partnership, which continues today, with the University of Cincinnati. This part of the partnership I don't think exists anymore. But, I'm sure you're familiar with people who go through like engineering programs, but they take 5 years. And at the end, they do very intensive studies and they end up with both their undergraduate degree and a master's in engineering. And there are other fields that have similar things. So the University of Cincinnati and Hebrew Union College built such a program where you could do your undergraduate work. And by the time you graduated with your BA, you would have the first year of rabbinical school done. And that's why a lot of people in these narratives from that time period have such extraordinarily young ages. It's not that they were, being sent off into the world prematurely. It's just that this program existed. But as these first started to emerge from the world, and then there was a bit of a gap actually for about 3 years before there was another reform rabbi who was ordained. And so when Rabbi Presand, in the first generation, we call them Vatikot at the WN, are pioneering rabbis. And so they came out, as you heard in her narrative, with a great deal of discrimination and bias, and had a lot of trouble getting jobs. Now, when you are the first, and Rabbi Presand has told me this, and I've heard her say it publicly, you can't fail. You're just not allowed to. And there was a point in her rabbinate where she actually wanted to give up because she was having so much trouble after Stephen Wise Free Synagogue getting a job. And then she went to the leaders in the movement and said, I don't think I can do this. And they said, no, you don't understand. You're the first. You can't. You have no choice. They literally said to her, you have no choice. But the part of the narrative we don't hear is what happens to number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Because the spotlight isn't on them. The weight of the movement isn't heavily behind them. And many of those women, not all, but many of them struggled mightily and sometimes even crushingly. And as this, was identified as a problem by the 1980s, notice how many years had gone by. This was not an immediate thing. Well, during those early years, the movement reacted by sending some of these rabbis when they were in college, in seminary rather, at Hebrew Union College, the college, out into the world to do like special weekends at congregations in the hope that if they saw a woman on the bema and heard a sermon from a woman and see that the world did not split open and the thunder and lightning not come out of the sky, that they would realize that they could have a rabbi who is a woman, and that it would be okay and the world would continue. So they did that. And they sent others and small delegations to talk to congregations. And then finally, in the 80s, WRN did a survey of congregants, boards, and senior rabbis in regard to hiring women as rabbis, and to find out what was keeping things back, what was holding them back from embracing this new rare animal. So you all ready for this list? It's remarkable. As I read this list, please recall the list I read from 1921-22 when they were talking about Martha Newmark. So these are the fears in 1980. Basic fear that women cannot do the job because A, the rigors of the rabbinate are too great and women too weak for the demanding routine. B, the Torah is too heavy. C, women are too soft-spoken. D, women do not know how to, nor care to, wield power or authority. E, women will need to be protected by the board or the senior rabbi in confrontational situations. F, women will cry at meetings when pressured or criticized. G, women will create more work for the senior rabbi because congregants won't want to employ the services of women for certain events. Plus, the senior rabbi won't want to call her late in the night in dread of pulling her away from family responsibilities. Now, this is part 2. A fear that women in the rabbinate will not be able to balance a career in personal life because of the following things. A, the first priority will be to family, and therefore either when female rabbis become pregnant or husbands or transferred, they will leave the congregation. B, their work will lead to dissension in their families. Now we're up to part 3. Fear that female rabbis are too political, too new, too quote in, I don't know what that means, or too fatty. I guess in means too much of a fad. So these are problems. A, female rabbis may alienate more traditional religious and social segments of the congregation because 1, female rabbis are feminists only. 2, female rabbis wish to attract public attention to themselves. 3, female rabbis will give the same sermon on feminism in towns where the ordination of, meaning like every week we'll just talk about feminism. That's what that means. So boring sermons. In towns where the ordination of women in Christianity is at issue, it will not bode well for the Jews to have a female rabbi. Moving on to a new genre of reasons why we don't want to have women rabbis. Part 4, a fear of the unfamiliar. The untoward aesthetic of seeing a woman carrying a Torah or wearing a talit or kippah. Untoward, just remember that, untoward. And finally, part 5, a fear of women succeeding. Women who succeed will reflect poorly on their colleagues. If women can read from the Torah, preach, and teach, the rabbi's duties become accessible to everyone. The mystique is lost. This possibility leads to the breakdown of the hierarchy of the rabbi-congregant relationship. Oh my goodness. Well, of course, that sounds more than a little dated. However, I would direct you this week to The Atlantic, where a female identified physician wrote about wearing scrubs and her identity in the hospital. And the discrimination she faces every day. So some of that is not too far away. And as we'll see, some of it is very alive. Okay. So let us go on. And we're going to stop here with a nice Torah text. And, let's go back to our readers. I don't know if Cheryl is still here.
I'm here, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment about what you read?
Oh, yeah. And we could pause if anybody wants to make a comment about that.
I find it hard to believe that after everything the Jewish people have been through throughout the millennia, that the male members of our faith would treat us women like we are excess baggage and property. And I've never heard such a list, what you were just reading, of male chauvinist, whatever ideas. I just, it just boggles my mind. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's okay. We'll pause if anybody else wants to reflect on that. And then we'll come back to reading. Anybody else have a?
Yes. So, Rabbi, I noticed that in all these reasons, a woman should not become a rabbi. No one challenged the intellectual capacity of women to do this. And that seems one of the most important attributes that someone has.
Yes, that is true. And nobody made a religious argument. Notice that too.
What struck me, Rabbi Zamore, about this is as you were going through them in my career, which is 27 years long, I've probably heard 3/4 of those. And some of those I have even heard recently. And that's what's so scary, right? I mean, we think of that's 1980s, and we're so different now in 2020. And I would argue that we're not. Some of our congregants and some of our congregations are not so different to that.
I would agree. And one of the things I think is important for all of us to own, that it is not men versus women. We create society together and perpetuate society together. So the divide is not just, this is somehow something men do to women. No, this is the society we create together in tandem and perpetuate together. And I would agree, you don't see the starkness of that list, like that all at once. But yes, the totality of what we've experienced as women, as rabbis, absolutely. You hear, a lot of that is like, oh yeah, and not too far away either. Recently,
It's a mind-boggling list, and it strikes me also that men are very threatened by what women can do.
And I think it's the assumption that men would be threatened. I don't even know if the men are threatened. I think it's just the assumption.
And I would also add that I have heard these things from women as well. It's not just men that say it. I've heard women say these things.
Yeah.
And which tells you how much they have taken on that patriarchal model.
Thank you.
Yeah, every year after placement season, when the rabbis, the newest rabbis, are ordained, we have celebrations for them right around their ordination for the women, the female identified rabbis, the Women's Rabbinic Network. And so we take them out, in ye old days before pandemic, we take them out, for a bite to eat and celebrate them. And at some point I ask them, please tell me, anything you would like us to know about your experience of becoming a rabbi. And inevitably, every single time I will hear, somebody will start a thread of a discussion of, well, we'd really like you to know that during placement, when we were being interviewed, that, they're not supposed to ask us about our family planning, but people always ask. And they always ask, or if they already have children, who's going to take care of your children? Things like this, that it is still an issue. And of course, none of the men ever report that they were asked who's going to take care of their children. Any other comments before we continue?
Yeah, that is true, but it seems to me to be a very strong movement towards having women ordained. I mean, the seminaries are at least 50%. Everybody under almost any category, transgender and what have you, is being ordained. And so it doesn't seem like there is a very strong movement against women, rather a very strong movement for women in the seminaries and the like.
Well, excellent. That is a excellent segue to the next part of our presentation. So, okay, so I will ask, well done. So I will ask Cheryl to read now, and the rest of you just to mute yourselves just for sound quality. And thank you, just in the English.
Okay. You shall not falsify measures of length, weight, or capacity. You shall have an honest balance, honest weights, an honest ekpha, dry measure, and an honest hin, liquid measure. I, the Lord, am your God who freed you from the land of Egypt.
Okay, so you should know this text. It's a very well-known text. It's so well-known. It's part of the Holiness Code. It's part of what we read on Yom Kippur. In fact, this drive for social justice, for equality in the law. There are many other laws that we can also quote that, about judgment and how it has to be fair. But I bring one about measuring. And of course, this is about in the marketplace and in the home market. And it's really one about financial transactions. But I like to think of this because I think it really does apply to employment practices and the opportunities we give employees. Ultimately, being a rabbi, I always say about myself, like I would be a rabbi, I would have become a rabbi even if there weren't a job, a career path at the end of it, because I wanted to immerse myself in Jewish study. But the reality is that this is my career. So the parts of my career, that are my career have to be treated with the solemnity, the gravitas of having a career and building a career and having appropriate remuneration and things like that. So to me, this points to the fact that it is a basic Jewish value that that people should be treated equally and remunerated equally. So we're going to look at the next slide, and Cheryl, if you'd mind just reading this one too.
Okay. But here in the case of one who uses false measures, there is no possibility of repentance because he has no way of knowing whom he cheated and is therefore unable to return the stolen money.
So to me, this is, thank you very much. To me, this is an important text. This is a Talmudic conversation building on that biblical text, the text in Leviticus, and saying something very important. That if you've been dealing with scales, measures that are off, right, are there to cheat people, that ultimately, what are you going to do? Like in the course of a couple of years, how many customers have you had? How many people have come through your stall that you don't know their names and don't know how to track them down? There's no way to make it up to the people. And to me, this is a wonderful teaching for the way women are treated, not only in the Rabbinate, but throughout our society, right, throughout the world, or for any group that is not treated equally. What is being stolen daily from all of us is something that can never be returned. So let me talk about now some of the challenges that are ongoing in the reform movement, specifically about rabbis, but also about all the employees who are female identified. And for me, it's funny, I was part of a conversation about 2 weeks ago in which somebody kept referring to women as a minority group and would say like, women and other minority groups. And someone else in the conversation stopped this person and said, we're not a minority, we're a majority, actually. And he kind of like looked for half a second and was like the mouth down, the chin down on the floor, like, I don't know what to say to that. And in my work, which is through a lens of, feminist gender work, the greater diversity, equity, and inclusion work, DEI work of all the types of people who function with the scales not level. To me, like, if we're the majority and we can't get equality at this point, right, after all these, years, how much more so do we have to be open and sensitive to the fact that somebody who is not as empowered, not as privileged, how uneven their scales are. So just keep that in mind as we go through this next part of the conversation. Okay, so here we go. Over 6 years ago, I helped start the Reform Pay Equity Initiative, bringing together all the different groups within the reform movement. The reform movement has 5 different professional groups. So like the CCR is the professional group for rabbis, the ACC is the professional group for cantors, and so on. The other groups are educators, early childhood educators, and temple administration. So that's like executive directors and administrators. And then there's some minor ones like program engagement professionals and 1 or 2 like that. But these are the 5 major groups, and they have their professional groups, they have staffs, things like that. So they do collection of data on compensation, and the CCAR in 2010-11 did their first analysis of the data through a gender lens. And so 6 years ago, we started this initiative to start conversation, a consolidated, focused conversation about the wage gap in the reform movement. So you may be familiar with, studies that show that women, depends whose study you look at, but for instance, the latest Pew study is reporting about 82 cents per dollar among professional groups. So when you look at, lawyers, doctors, et cetera, accountants, business people, the wage gap is about women get 82 cents for every dollar men get. So here's the data. This is actually now old data, but it is actually not so old also. So meaning this is from our study of the 2017-18 data. Actually 16-17 data. We have just had a new study. It is sitting literally fully edited, ready to be printed, going through the next phase of the publication in the CCR journal, and hopefully will be out either in the winter edition or the spring issue of the CCR journal. And what it shows is that administrators who in 2018 showed a 19% gap, cantors that had this broad range depending on the type of cantorate between 14 and 29%, 29, by the way, being at the top level of cantors. So like the more senior big congregation you're at, the bigger the gap. And for rabbis, anywhere between 4 to 13%. But when you go across, aggregate all of that together, it becomes 19%. And on the new study, the new aggregation of the pre-pandemic data from 2019-20, we see that administrators still are at 19%. The cantors are still at 14 to 29%. And the rabbis have great improvement in 2 categories. But unfortunately, when you bring all of that data together, it only brings us to 18% gap. So I believe that your name is Bob, is that right? With the green polo? I think the question you raised, like, how could this be, right? How could it be when women are 100% equal in terms of numbers, right? You're asking a very good question. How could it be that women are still lagging in this way? And it is extremely poignant for us as Reform Jews, because what are some of our top values? Social justice and egalitarianism, right? And for us to have this problem, wow, that's really startling. I want to show you a piece by Barbara Osvald. it appeared in a symposium in the CCR Journal Reform Quarterly that I co-edited. And it is Cantor Asfeld's, it's an excerpt from her memoir, which I think is Cat Song, Cat Bird. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Cat something. It's her memoir. So let's see this. And we need some more readers. Bob, would you mind reading? Bob Rabinowitz?
Okay, here we go.
Do you need to make that bigger? Here, hold on 1 second. Give me half a second.
Gretchen, the administrator, calls me to her office. Her office is smack in the middle of the temple administration area. It was windows on 3 sides. Her sharp eyes see all, and there was much to see. There was a secretary at the copy machine pushing buttons with another waiting behind her. Several volunteers are collecting flyers at a long table. The young woman is sitting at the reception desk, comparing 2 lists and making check marks on one of them. In the rear to the left sits the bookkeeper, bejeweled glasses low on her nose and tethered to a bejeweled chain. Her ledgers are pale blue with smudgy edges and thick as phone books. The clergy secretary is typing loudly under the fluorescence, head swiveling from copy to carriage.
Okay, we'll give you one more paragraph and then we'll share some of the responses.
Sure. Here are some sample letters. Gretchen states without introduction, "What you've been writing isn't quite our style, so here are sample thank yous and condolence notes. Here are birth, engagements, wedding, and acknowledging an honorarium. Please be less flowery in your letters. Here's what you do. You get a memo from the office about a death. You respond briefly. Now you may rewrite these in your own words, but keep to the style and length. Our secretaries have enough to do as it is. Of course, in special cases, handwritten is best. I ask how I am to know when a case is special. Gretchen explains that if I'm invited to lunch or for dinner, a personal touch will be welcome. If an honorarium is unusually generous, I should put pen to paper. I ask how much generous would be."
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's, Sylvia, we're gonna go to you. This is a little long, but I think it's really telling.
Okay. She sits back in her chair and answers with a question. "How much do you usually get?" I'm not following. I tell her I don't know what she means. Seeing that I am perplexed, Gretchen snaps her chair forward and rubs the sides of her nose with both hands. She says, "You'll never get as much as the senior rabbi, as Jacob, no matter how much effort you put in." Seeing my blank face, she continues, "You know how after every bar mitzvah you get some cash?" When I do not nod, she continues further, "You probably already know that Jacob gets the most. You and the assistant rabbi, well, it depends on how much time you put in with the kid, how good the kid's speech is, how good the kid is on the bima. Let me know if you get a check made out to the temple. Has that happened yet? We'll cash it for you and give you a check. Oh, if it's made out to a temple fund like the music fund, you're sunk. If it's ours, if I can't, okay. I went down too low. Okay, wait. I got a $100 bill from the son of a member after his father's unveiling. He kind of palmed it up to me, all folded up. He stuck his hand out from the limo window as he was leaving the cemetery. But I'm not getting any other money. Gretchen thrusts her chair back even further and laces her fingers behind her head. She thinks for a long moment, then she spells it out. My cantorial predecessors were family men, raising children, sending them to college. I think of Barry, who was let go shortly before I took the position. He threw a music stand at a soprano. Barry wasn't even married. Did Barry get honoraria? Barry sang for his. Something clicks, and I remember my initial meeting with Jacob and the temple president. And when they offered me the cantorial position, the meeting wasn't much of a negotiation. The president simply named my salary in stentorian tones that did not allow for conversation, $15,500. The congregation was located on a main street of a wealthy New York suburb. It boasted 1,500 family members and about 90 B'nai Mitzvah per year. Even back then, fresh from HUC, I knew that cantors of large congregations were earning higher salaries than this. The president could see that I was taken aback by the low number.
Okay, well, as you can see, Cantor Oswald has this very engaging, way of writing, and she makes the scene come alive for us, almost like a novel. And I just want to make two things clear. So one is for the benefit of Rabbi Joseph. I've now talked to her about this, but this what Rabbi Cantor Oswald is describing of kind of like getting cash in the palm after doing some sort of life cycle or pastoral responsibility is not at all normative in the Jewish world, in the liberal Jewish world today. I was a congregational rabbi for 18 years. I was paid, an appropriate salary. I had benefits, and my congregants, if they wanted to thank me, would give to my discretionary fund or another fund. And I would say, once in all that time, did someone give me a wad of cash into my hand, which I assured him, and I did put directly into my discretionary fund and did not pocket. So this was not the expectation of the way I would be compensated. And this is a very old world model that I'm actually kind of shocked was still alive in 1975. But I think it's really to our benefit that we see this kind of alternative world model, which is not a modern model, because you can see that she is not being compensated appropriately, not in her base salary or in these tips that people are giving the clergy. And, you could have a whole conversation about whether this congregation, the way things were set up are right, but we can see that the scale is not equal. And I bring this up in this model from 1975, not because this is the way things are done in 2021, but because I think it's important to see, because when we talk about that first generation of women, whether it's rabbis, cantors, doctors, lawyers, whoever, they functioned with a lot of inequality that we don't even discuss, because it's somehow crass to talk about the financial part. But, I'm the woman who wrote a book about money, so I'll talk about it. What I hear from that generation is that the deficit with which they now are retiring because they did not receive the same throughout their careers is really marked. And I just want to show you this graphic. This is from a few years ago from the secular world, but it shows that the wage gap really adds up. It's one thing to think, okay, well, if the wage gap is only 5 cents in your pay category, or even 12 cents, or whatever it is, okay, it's just a couple of cents. That doesn't sound like a big deal. But I don't know about you, but here, this is based on wages lost over a 40-year career. And this is showing Asian women who do not make the same as white men, white women, Black women, Native women, and Latina Hispanic women. And, when you look at the wage gap, not in the Jewish world, we're talking about the overall American workforce of all types of employment aggregated. Here I am. I'm a white woman. I don't know, when I retire, I would like an extra $500,000. I'm sure every one of my colleagues would. I'm sure the Latino women would like an extra $1 million. It is really amazing. So, I think that thinking of that impact is really important. But in the meantime, let's move on to yet another challenge. So, you may be even asking yourself, as Bob so nicely asked before, if there's so many women in these professions and women in the congregations and women in the leadership, how can it be? And, before I spoke about the fact that, well, this is the society that we in partnership with one another create and perpetuate. And a lot of it we think is driven by, of course, implicit bias, meaning the bias that we unconsciously hold. And this is all about neuroscience. And I'm sure you've read articles about this. The same thing that allows us to get into our car and drive a car or make our coffee in the morning and barely think about what we're doing is that, as Daniel Kahneman would say, the Nobel laureate would say, is that type 1 quick thinking. And that's where the bias comes in. It sneaks into the system. And when we're in the type B thinking, we slow down thinking, we have a chance of not ridding all the bias, but as much as we consciously can. So the CCR just released this. I do want to show you their little intro video. I want you to remind you of many hours ago with your first cup of coffee this morning when I showed you my Google search of Rabbi as we watch this. Got some snappy music here. Okay. So nice little snappy, easy to understand video. It's part of a series of resources to help especially search committees and employers with their biases as they're doing not only it's directed towards rabbinic searches, but it could be adapted to any kind of search, and to have those broader conversations of how bias affects us. So when we're looking at that pay gap or the advancement of women within a profession such as the Rabbinate, you can't have that conversation really without that conversation about bias. So here's another piece of the puzzle. Like how do we live up to the standards of Reform Judaism and our Jewish values of how do we do all of this, you know, in a way that, you know, that allows us to live up to those values. Here, I'm just catching up with the chat. Okay, so realized there were some lingering things there. Okay, so sorry. Going back. So here, another thing that WRN has just introduced and we feel is really important to this conversation is family and medical leave and having appropriate paid standards. So we've created, we actually did a 2-year project working with experts to create policy standards for the Jewish community. Again, notice we're not just saying for rabbis, for women rabbis, for Reform Jews. We're just going utopian. We're going for everyone. It was very important for us to be able to go big. These are all on our website, by the way, womensrabbinicnetwork.org. They're all free and available to the public. We very much want people interacting with them. And we have, you know, throughout, we have these quotes that were drawn from a survey we did of our WRN members. So here, one of our rabbis said, "I've never worked in a congregation that offered this in a contract. I was granted family leave when the need arose, and the congregation was generous, but I feel it is vital that this be contractual and not just based on a congregation's generosity." And overall, that's what we found, that that it wasn't that people weren't getting family leave, especially paternity leave, but it wasn't written down. It was creating a lot of angst, and it was being perceived as something you have to negotiate and therefore had to be sacrificed, or other things had to be sacrificed in the negotiation process. That, for instance, if you were going to be asking for parental leave in a particular contract because of your family plans, that you might not be able to ask for a raise that year. And what we've tried to do is reframe it as a human right and not as a negotiable benefit. We've given Jewish text to support that view. We've talked about the state of paid leave in the United States, which of course is miserable. There's a lot of legislation going on now, potential legislation that hopefully will change part of that narrative. And we've given contract language, employee handbook language, and have a lot of frequently asked questions in the hope, because again, if that bias when we look at women is that somehow that they are not a committed employee because they have to do caregiving. Well, maybe the solution is that we don't see women as the sole caregivers, that we are a society that cares for one another. Of course, the pandemic has magnified that immensely. Even in that implicit bias video, there was one line about that, and about, don't assume that the men stay home to help with the schooling, that women do that men can do that too. I think that was written pre-pandemic, so even the more so now. And of course, we see the results of these bias and the distribution of labor in our society and how it's affecting all of us now during the pandemic. I'm going to go on to our next topic. This is safe space. Rabbi Joseph has graciously referred to our safe space work that we go into Jewish seminaries. But part of WRN's mission, and I think part of the ongoing challenge we have in the reform movement to make everybody equal and to live up to those values of being driven by social justice values, is is that we have not yet created safe space for everybody within our communities, our congregations, our seminary, and beyond. And you may know that our Reform movement now has 3 of our organizations: Hebrew Union College, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and the URJ itself is now conducting 3 different legal investigations to reflect on harassment, abuse, and misconduct. And so if any of you or somebody you know, or any information that's come to you, the URJ investigation is still open till November 15th, and you can interact with that investigation. And so what the WN has done as a group of women who sometimes have been the subject of some of this, we've created this website so that the resources for reporting are all in one place. We have spiritual resources to support people, and we have a section from experts so that you can learn about what is actually a legal investigation, how it is differentiated from an investigation being done by the police, for instance, and what the goals of it are. So that's important to our work and a big part of our work today. I'm going to continue, and now I'm going to bring to you 2 videos of 2 legendary rabbis. Joy Levitt from the Reconstructing Movement. She just announced her retirement from being the head of the Upper West Side JCC, as we say, a big job. And Rabbi Elise Goldstein, who has written many important books and is in Toronto, one of our Vati Code, our first generation of women rabbis in the Reform movement. And we're going to hear 2 very differing opinions about what is the actual impact of women in the rabbinate. And at the end of listening to both of these, we're going to talk. So as you're listening to these, think about, do you agree more with one of them? And what do you think the impact of women in the rabbinate has been?
I really hope that women in the rabbinate is not a radical transformation of Judaism. I hope that it is the natural extension of a tradition that is elastic, plastic, ever widening to include more and more people. That's how I read Judaism. So radical transformation would say we came from a misogynist, patriarchal, oppressive society, and we broke that. That's not how I read it. I respect those who do. I've never read it that way. I've read it as we've adapted to the changes that we saw possible at every stage of our history. We took the very best from the societies in which we lived, and what America had to offer in the mid to late 20th century was inclusivity for women, and we rode that wave. And that's part of the muscles that we've developed since the beginning of Judaism.
Okay, so that's her point of view. And now we're going to see what Rabbi Goldstein thinks.
I think the changes are obvious, and I think they're huge. In my last book called New Jewish Feminism, in the introduction, I say that there's been no revolution in Jewish life as big as the revolution of the engagement of women in religious life since emancipation. The leaving of the ghetto for Jews in emancipation, in my mind, is equal to the ordination of women. That's how big a historical movement it's been. Because everything you knew about Judaism was called into question, because everything you understood about gender roles was called into question, because the very existence of women in the rabbinate challenged the notion of spirituality, of God the Father, of non-feminist theology of the disengagement of women. These are all deep, deep changes. It has nothing to do with the fact that there was just a woman on the bema. It's the concept of having women as leaders of the Jewish people that radically changed Judaism, that caused people to ask the question, where are women in this text? That caused people to ask the question, why is this law for or against? Can women, can't women, should women, shouldn't women? That caused people to ask, what is the Judaism that we've inherited? Is it a Judaism that has been understood by men, for men, through men? Or is it a Judaism of all the Jews? And these questions were asked only because women were in leadership positions. It has radically, radically changed the face of Judaism. I think obviously for the better. And it'll be the same thing for gays and lesbians as they take leadership roles. Judaism will not be destroyed. It'll be the same thing for forward-thinking Jews. The reality is we really have two kinds of Judaism today. We have progressive thinking Judaism and we have traditional thinking Judaism. The biggest challenge for Judaism is not women in the rabbinate. It is getting these two Judaisms to talk to each other. It is getting these two Judaisms to live together. It is getting non-Orthodox Jews to take responsibility for the future of Judaism and to stop abdicating it and to stop saying, well, if it wasn't for them, there'd be no Judaism. We have to start saying, if it's not for us, there'll be no Judaism, because frankly, we are the Judaism of the future. In 200 years, I really cannot believe that there will still be Polish dress-wearing Jews who live in the 18th century. There will still be a pocket of them, just like the Amish. But the Amish are not the mainstream of Christianity, right? Liberal Protestants are the mainstream, and liberal Catholics are the mainstream of Christianity. So my biggest question for the Judaism of the future is not the role of women. My biggest question is, when will liberal Jews take full responsibility for being the Jews of the future?
Okay, powerful words from two powerful rabbis. And what we're going to do now is I'd like to break us all out into breakout rooms. I don't know who's handling that. Maybe Rabbi Joseph? Is that my share? Sorry.
How many people do you want in each breakout room?
Since there's sometimes multiples in one screen, let's do 3, because some will end up being 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how it sorts itself. And we don't want to get too big. And what we're going to be discussing is, which opinion do you feel drawn to and why? And what do you think of those? And then we'll come back and share a couple of thoughts about that. And in the back of our minds, we're harboring the question, what is the impact of women in the rabbinate? Of course, Rabbi Goldstein does talk a bit about that. So we'll build from her words.
So I just want to say to my folk, I know some of you dislike going into breakout rooms, but just to be fair, to make sure that I'm not reassigning people into many different rooms, I would really appreciate it if you did go into the breakout room when the invitation goes out.
Okay.
All right, Bill Saganek is by him. No, he's got someone else to talk to. I just want to make sure Judy Silver Weisberg is by herself.
Yeah, I'm going to go in room 3 with the Bodens.
So let me put her into Ida Ray and Luber and Murray are supposed to be with Judy. Let me move her to room 5. Hi, Mary. You're muted. I'm just checking this, and a few people, the Bodens need to be moved into a room with other people. I'm going to move them to room 2. Just trying to check there's at least 2 in every room. Alice, let me check which room you are in. Alice Cohen, if you go to room 5, if you go down to where the 4 squares are and click on that, you'll see there's an invitation for you to go to room 5. There we go. Mary, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I think until like maybe 30, do you think 3:05 is too much time, or 3:03? What do you think?
Let's do 3:03. I'm just double checking now that everybody's in a room with somebody.
Okay, I'm going to go join the Bowdens to say hello to them.
Okay, not a problem. And I'll stay on because Luba and Mary don't seem to have gone anywhere.
Okay.
And I don't.
Thank you. The committee had asked me to do a breakout room during the session. So
we have some folk that really resist breakout rooms.
Okay, sorry about that.
And then I always have to reassign people. So because I have, one person in a breakout room, that doesn't work.
Oh, the Bowdens just left their room.
So they should be coming here.
Let's see if they come here. It's funny. I told them I'd be back.
Or they either got off totally.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Okay. Then I'll stay here. Since it was the Bowdens, I was going to say hello, but that's okay.
They're so sweet.
Yes. Is Mr. Bowden, Dr. Bowden? I can't remember. Is a PhD maybe?
I think he has a PhD. Yeah, I think you're right. So, yeah, no, these are a wonderful group of people. I feel very blessed.
Absolutely. Fun group.
So Jerry has not joined.
Yeah, that's okay. Sometimes people also walk away from their computers.
Right. And that's the other reason I like to stay on, because then I have to explain to them how to get at their breakout rooms when they come back. And that's not intuitive for some of them.
Yeah.
Thank you for talking about the pay equity stuff. That's a conversation I began a few months ago with my congregation, because I have 634 hours of overtime they owe me. And I said, next contract, we need to really address the overtime and pay issue and how we're going to balance that out.
Yeah. Challenging.
Yeah, I know part of it's the pandemic, but even if there wasn't the pandemic, I still would have our overtime hours.
Yeah.
And theoretically, they owe me for it. So currently they owe me 7.5 months plus 2 weeks vacation.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. I think that piece by Barbara Oswald is so funny. But I mean, it's not funny because obviously she was being so radically underpaid, and they were taking into account that she would get those tips. But, it's like another era, right? Like different planet.
Well, this congregation is set up uniquely because I am part-time. So for example, if I do a life cycle for a congregant, I don't get paid. If I do a life cycle for a child or a parent or a brother or a sister of a congregant, I do get paid and I do get those tips.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the tips come. Usually they ask me how much the payment is. So it's sort of like it's sort of a hybrid. It's a really
hybrid
model.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that from other rabbis and congregations where it's limited service. That's I heard from a Reconstructionist colleague where like everything, like for BIMA responsibilities was part of the base pay, but like every session she met with a bar mitzvah student or anything, like each of those was per diem honoraria, and billed to the congregant. It was like really weird and put a lot of it on her. So,
and that's one of the big challenges of a congregation like this. So hi Bob, you are supposed to, you came back already. You were in a room with M. I'm not sure who M is. I can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself. There we go. You're unmuted.
Yes, Emmett identified herself as of the Robinson family. That's as far as I got, but we had a nice chat anyway. And
Right. I'm going to be bringing people back in a minute anyway.
All right, good.
Yeah. So it's 3:02. Shall I close all rooms because it takes a minute for them to get back?
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
And then I have like, processing this and then one other question and then questions. So.
Okay. Everybody will come back fairly shortly. The Bowdens are back. Hi, Bowden. How are you? Rabbi Mary Zamore wanted to say hello, and then you disappeared for a little bit.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Did you drop out of the room?
You disappeared. We disappeared.
All of
Yeah,
a sudden, our computer ran out of energy and the whole thing went blank.
Oh, no.
Poor Rabinowitzes.
Yeah. Well,
They gave up on us, maybe.
I got to see you anyway.
Hi, Bob.
We're sorry about that.
Electricity died.
So we had to start over from scratch.
All right.
But what are we basically supposed to be discussing? Mary?
Yeah. So is everybody back?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Sorry. So, so we are now just going to do a check-in about what you discussed in your groups. You're supposed to be pondering the dichotomy between Rabbi Levitt and Rabbi Goldstein's thoughts about the impact of women in the rabbinate. Rabbi Levitt, just to remind you, was saying, well, this is just part of the natural order of evolution. And Rabbi Goldstein was taking it to a whole different level of saying, no, this is one of the two most important, most influential things in Jewish history after the emancipation from the ghetto. And, we've talked about the Enlightenment, but of course the Enlightenment was caused by the emancipation from the ghetto. So it was only, when we were able to start to integrate into the urban setting and into the urban education that we then, it absorbed the lessons of the Enlightenment. So, so friends, what wisdom? You can take yourself off. I guess Rabbi Joseph, I'll allow you to moderate this, to call on people. So.
So if you go down to where it says reactions, there's a place for you to raise your hand. And then I will know to call on you. Cheryl.
The one thing I noted between the two of them, Rabbi Levitt seemed to say that we had to kind of roll with the punches. Whatever comes our way, we'll just go with the flow. Whereas Rabbi Goldstein seemed to be saying, we need to wake up. Us liberal Jews need to, get on the stick and initiate the conversation almost with the more traditional Jews. It's almost like the onus is on us because it seems like the traditional guys, they're going to be there forever in their own little world. And it seems like she was saying, we can't move forward without starting a conversation and keeping it going with them.
Yeah, it's funny how she transformed the question, right? And saying everything is called into question, right? That's the title they gave to her answer. And indeed, she says, well, women in leadership, right? She's not limiting it to just women rabbis, which is appropriate. She's saying this greater idea of women being equals within Judaism and progressive Judaism. Basically the cat's out of the bag and you're asking the wrong question. But let's hear what some other folks have to say. I love seeing all these hands up.
Yes, it's fabulous. Darla and Jim.
I kept calling. Yep, go ahead.
This is the guy with the green shirt, I think.
Yes, I kept calling him Bob and I apologize. His name isn't on the screen.
If we could share, I think, my thought was that I saw positives in both of the presentations. So I saw really a blend, but I really think that this whole movement is societal. I mean, I was mentioning that I've been in education for I don't know how many, since the earth's been cooling, I always say, but for over, 35 years. And at one point, you never saw a woman take a leadership position such as a principal, a local superintendent, a state superintendent. I mean, it was extremely rare. And now it is very, very much par for the course that you have women in very high leadership positions, which has been a boon to the profession and very accepted. And I don't know exactly the pay scale, but it's just happened. I never heard of a male going into engineering years and years ago. And now we've got, I think, 30, I'm sorry, a female, it's like 35% of the class at University of Maryland has women taking engineering and physics areas. So I just see this as, it's a natural growth and thinking about women and their role as leaders in various fields.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jim,
Cheryl's spoken. Now unmute yourself, Cheryl.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, one of the things that we talked about was like, well, actually, this was with Cheryl Amster and I were both IT professionals at one time. And she talked about learning about the fact that her colleague who was hired after her was getting paid more. Now, I worked in the federal government, but I was in a group with more than, I think it was 15 men and me. I was the woman. And that's how it was like in the late 70s, early 80s. Later on, that did change. And in the federal government, salaries were more similar, but promotional opportunities were fewer. And I think what women rabbis have faced is not unlike what others of us in the workplace have had to go through. The other thing I thought that we talked about was the distinction made between traditional and progressive Jews, and the fact that basically we need to be more proactive, that traditional Jews will there'll be, I guess, the assumption is fewer in the future, although they do have more children. But I think that we do need to be proactive in pushing these things and pushing for stronger role for women. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob and Barb Hurwitz.
So, hi, Rabbi. It's Barb Hurwitz. I was really excited to hear when you said this morning about 100 women being ordained in Israel.
It's total, not women. It was. I actually don't know the percentage, but it's a good chunk of them.
Okay, I stand corrected, but at least they're reform and they're progressive. And I remember the last time I was in Israel, we went to visit Beit Daniel, and the rabbi was wonderful and sat and chatted with us. And they are so limited in funds because they get very little money from the government. And so with more and more reform, progressive congregations coming up in Israel, I think that's going to make the change. I really believe that all the Orthodox are on one side and then there's nothing. So now with more and more progressive congregations and especially the women coming up, I think that will make a big change for the state of Israel.
I agree. It's actually quite exciting to watch.
Cantor Marge.
Well, my group, which happened to be, my breakout group happened to be all female, and we resonated much more with the second point of view. And I thinking about little girls growing up have the opportunity to see women of different races and gender preferences and all kinds of things that we just didn't have. It is, yes, part of a larger movement, but to me it is huge. And before I went to cantorial school, I was an educator for over 30 years, and I was a school principal in 3 schools, elementary schools, where I followed only male principals. And little girls would come up to me all the time and say, I didn't know girls could be principals. And I don't know how many thousands of kids I had in my schools over the years, but it seems to me that had to make some kind of a difference. And I'm sure the same thing happens. People maybe don't go up to rabbis in the same way and say that, but I'm sure little girls over the years are saying, oh, I didn't know girls could be rabbis. So it is going to make a huge difference, I think. So we did resonate much more with the second point of view.
Thank you, Cantor. A lot of people tell the story, and I will just tell you, I have a bit of a bias. I don't care for this story. But it really is the flip side of what you're saying, with little girls saying, oh, I didn't know girls could be principals, that now boys come up to rabbis and say, I didn't know boys could be rabbis. And I guess I don't care for it because I don't know, there's something sad about it. People usually tell it to me like, oh, isn't that hysterically funny? And I don't find it funny, actually. I kind of find it sad that our children are still growing up with the blue aisle or the pink aisle mentality. And meaning the toy stores, of course, most toy stores have a girl side and a boy side. And in fact, Toys R Us and several of the other, I think Target just announced that they're getting rid of this, with the realization that, of course, children of any gender can play with any toy, right? And hopefully our children see enough role models of all different beautiful identities that they can dream anything, right? So, which is the bigger issue. It means that we're failing our children by not putting diversity in front of them. And it doesn't mean that the diversity has to come just from the rabbi or just the cantor. It is the pictures on our walls. It's the pictures in our books. It is the language we use. It is the encouragement we use when a child says, oh, I want to grow up to be, right? And says, or has a proclivity to do something. And it's those subtle messages and the models that they see in their home. So it is not, we have a lot of growth in our society to get to the point where our children are not echoing, because they're just a reflection of the rest of us.
Do you mind if we take 2 more comments?
No, please, we've got time.
Okay, Sylvia Block.
Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Okay. I think we were very reflective of what some things have been said, particularly Darla. I particularly went on the fact, and we both agreed that that the second opinion is reflective of what's going on in our society in general, that there is an upheaval, a roiling, a looking at things in a new way, and opening up for all kinds of categories that were not looked at previously. And this is basically what we got from the second, and we're very much in favor of that.
And Cheryl Amster.
I just want to say, piggyback off of what you said, Rabbi Zamore. I attended my niece's high school graduation about 7 years ago. And we're sitting there in the Patriot Center in Virginia, watching these kids parade across the gym floor to receive their diplomas. And it was like watching the United Nations. The diversity of these kids and the way they embraced each other and their accomplishments and the families there to support them. It's like when I talk to my niece and nephew about things like that, they're like, oh yeah, my friend is this or my friend is that. And it's like they see past, say, the gender of the person, their, ethnicity, maybe their sexual orientation, whatever it is. And it's just, oh, well, this is my friend and we go to the movies together, or we go to the football game together. And they don't even look at that. It's like they look past it. They look at the person, not what they represent. So I think the schools have a big part to play in that, as well as, parents and families.
Absolutely. And, of course, it varies across our communities of how well they're doing in terms of that. So,
Can I
King Ratzon. Darla?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this was just on the news early this morning, a huge push. We don't have anyone where it's a huge dearth of truck drivers. And so the new push is to encourage women to consider being truck drivers, and they're raising salaries like crazy. And they were saying, well, women are afraid they'll have to be on the road for a week on end. They won't see their children. No, that's not true. So, I mean, we are kind of turning corners in many different ways, I think, in this country.
I'm Judy Silver Weisberg.
Yes, you can hear me. Okay, I'd like to just say that our group, even though we didn't use the words of what you're talking about in those terms, we did talk about pay equity and how our lives were affected. And I want to say it's important for all of us to listen to our children and grandchildren, because whoever the last speaker was, it's true. They have different insights and different ways of looking at things. And sometimes even though we think we're progressive, even myself, who's very liberal in a lot of things, sometimes I get stuck on something that I think should be a certain way. And we really need to open our minds and open our hearts. And I think we're going to make more progress with women like Rabbi Zamore and leaders like Rabbi Joseph and our wonderful congregation. I think they're very woke for the most part. I'm just really positive or optimistic that we're going to make more progress in the coming years than we have in maybe the past 15 or 20, because it just accelerates, because we've got the mass media going on here. And I think that accelerates change. And some things are not good about it, but I think for that, it's good.
So Alice, I see that you're manually putting your hand up, so I'm sorry I missed you, but why don't you chime in?
What I wanted to say was the difference between my generation and my granddaughter's generation is just unreal. The things they come out with, the things they say, they can do anything, they will do anything. I've got one granddaughter now who's spending 2 years in Africa working with women and convincing women that they are their own people. They can do anything they want if they have education, if they open their own businesses. They don't need a man to support you. And when I grew up, it was assumed that you were going to be married by the time you're 21. Otherwise, there was something wrong with you. And my granddaughters do not see that at all. They will have their own lives, their own careers. They will be their own people. And I see that as such progress.
Thank you. I wanted to just broaden it. We of course can take more questions from the breakout groups, but I wanted to make sure if there were any questions anybody had for me. Can be from the first lecture, the second lecture, or something that's not in the lectures.
Sylvia Block.
You have to unmute yourself.
Hi. I have a question which is more or less was triggered in my mind because of a question that was asked this morning. What is the percentage of women in the other three denominations? We were asked about the Reform, it was 50-50. What about Reconstructionist, Conservative, and Orthodox? Do you know those?
I don't know. So the if you're going to remember a figure of women of the Rabbinate, don't remember 50-50, because that was specifically about how many students in the classes at HUC.
Right.
And that is not the number of rabbis. Rabbis make up about 1/3. We're starting to now exceed 1/3, and one day it will be 50-50, but it's not there yet.
Thank you for correcting.
No, that's okay. And there's a lot of apple and oranges comparisons when you talk about gender in the Rabbinate because of the way depending if you're looking at the number of women ordained, right? There are 835 women who've been ordained in the Reform movement. That includes Jerusalem, New York, Cincinnati, and LA, all 4 campuses of Hebrew Union College. But when you look at working rabbis who are affiliated with the Central Conference of American Rabbis, our professional organization, that's the figure that we get for 1/3. And that includes retired rabbis, which include people from an era when there were only men. So, that's, the demographics are slowly evolving. In terms of the rabbinical schools or the other movements, well, Yeshivat Maharat is very, very small. It shares a space in Riverdale in New York, in the upper part of New York, Manhattan, called the Habayit. And in this institutional house, we have Avi Weiss's synagogue, which I can't remember the name of right now. And we have Yeshivat Chovei Torah, which is the male progressive Orthodox yeshiva for men, and also Yeshivat Maharat. And I would say probably Yeshivat Chovei Torah, which is also known as YT, is bigger than Yeshivat Maharat from my eyeballing it. But of course, in the Orthodox world, the definition of rabbi is, that we're all rabbis, but, there are certain segments of especially the mainstream to ultra-Orthodox community where every other man becomes a rabbi because it's a religious goal for the amount of study you've done over a lifetime and not a professional tract. So, that's almost like a different animal. So you're talking about, when Orthodox women rabbis, this tiny little drop in a huge ocean of men with, beards and black hats and black suits. So that's why they're particularly rock stars. And in the conservative movement, reconstructing Judaism, a lot of women, conservative movement, they might be tracking about 1/3 also. I'm not sure if the classes are regularly 1/2. It could be. I'm trying to remember. I've been there a couple of times in the last few years, but it was pre-pandemic, so it's a while ago. So I'm trying to remember like who I saw in the room. Felt like 50%. So, which calls into mind, we saw in some of those things I read that, in the 1920s, the 1930s, people were bemoaning the fact that congregations are filled with women. And if we have women rabbis too, it's just going to throw us into the abyss of too many women, right? And today you're hearing the same trope returning. And this just, again, is so problematic in so many ways. I mean, first of all, like for the other 2,000, 3,000 years, nobody complained there were too many men. But that's, again, we really, why can't we populate the same space? That's the bigger question. What is wrong with us that once a profession, and, you can go to something besides religion, many careers have been, once they hit that tipping point of 50% women, go, just that's it. It's all women. Like it's there's something definitely strange. And for instance, I read a study last year, and we've seen this with the pandemic and mask wearing, that wearing a mask is associated more with women with a feminine aspect than with a masculine. And that some guys see that as like unmacho. But even recycling is considered to be a more feminine thing. And some guys see it as not a macho thing when they do studies about this and how people see gender. It's nuts. So you see my impatient side. Okay, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, going back to something a little bit earlier, you mentioned Leviticus, honest weights, honest measure.
Yes.
And I'd like to think of the two things that are extant today. One is, for instance, the Department of Defense will come after any caught cheaters. and penalize the heck out of them if contracts aren't fulfilled. At least there used to be very elaborate systems to make sure nobody cheated on contracts. And that could go down for 10 or 15 years. So there's traceability there. The second point is why are so many of our past cultures patriarchal? And I acknowledge that we need to progress in order to distribute the burden of maintaining civilization in broad category. But why have we come to this point where we're amazed that there are women engineers, women lawyers, women rabbis? Why is that so unusual?
Well, that is beyond my pay grade. I will say maybe your next speaker will be an anthropologist and be able to speak better to why so many societies are patriarchal. I will just decry that. But thank you.
So two participants have raised their hand. I'm going to take two more questions and then we're going to wrap up because we've gone a little over time again, but that's because Rabbi Zamore is an amazing presenter. Dala.
Yeah, at some point, I think, Rabbi Zamore, that you put up a slide, but it might have been last night, that said what was kind of a question: what is a rabbi? Almost looking for that definition. And I've said this to Rabbi Joseph many times, and I am an educator, and I admire so very much great teachers. And I always say that I think she is one of the best teachers of Judaism that I've ever experienced. But I'm just wondering what the answer to that question might be.
Well, it's evolving. I mean, the answer, it's evolving, but I do feel that we're the ones who are entrusted to the oversight. I don't think we do it, but we do it in partnership with the community and the other Jewish professionals that exist in our communities, the transmission of Judaism from generation to generation. And we oversee the evolution of Judaism. We talk about that Lador Vador being almost as if it's a reified set process where we're just handing a baton forward. But that would be an easy task. The harder task is contributing to the ongoing evolution of Judaism. And when we talk about Reform Judaism and what happens today, people who to bemoan that we're changing everything, well, no, Judaism has always evolved. Always evolved. And we're just in that chain of tradition. So we're both preserving and evolving at the same time. And I think that's what's the most exciting thing about the space I get to work in. So it's a great question. And, we are, because of the pandemic, we're seeing, in all of our lives and all of our professions, we're seeing a quantum leap in the changes of what it means to be a rabbi. And, Rabbi Joseph, we've joked about it through this, but yes, now like managing tech is now part of the modern rabbinate, and it's here to stay, for better or worse, here to stay. Managing social media and getting, learning to express yourself through social media to engage people is now here to stay.
Thank you.
I want to thank Rabbi Mary Zamore so much for being our second presenter in this fabulous Jean Klein Scholar in Residence weekend. I also want to thank the committee that puts this together under the leadership of Bill and Laura Selganic. My being a part-time rabbi means that a lot of the programming that comes to you, some of it is arranged by me, but a lot of it comes out of our committees. And they have done a phenomenal job again this year in bringing us somebody thought-provoking. Once again, a reminder that if you're interested in this topic of women in the rabbinate, this book here, The Sacred Calling, we've been sending out links to it. There is so much more material here, so many more questions, and I am happy to always talk about the contents of this book with you. Also, let's make this part of our ongoing conversation, this evolution of Judaism, the equality of gender, the role of women. This is a conversation that doesn't have to end here today just because we did it today. We can continue it throughout this celebration of 50 years of women in the Rabbinate here in North America and even beyond. So thank you all also for coming and sitting on your chairs for this long.
Yes. And Rabbi Joseph, I actually have homework for you and your congregation. So I made a deal with myself that if I was going to put time into going out to congregations and teaching this material, I would leave every congregation with the following homework. So these are the 4 things that I'm challenging every congregation with. Find a way to observe the Yortzeit of Rabbi Regina Yonis, whether it's at Parshat Bereshit or sometime nearby. Review the pay of your employees with a pay equity lens. Adopt a robust paid family medical leave for all employees that is clearly communicated, and to adopt an ethics policy to create safety and respect in your community with strong procedures. And the URJ has wonderful materials to guide that process.
Oh, I love all 3 of those. We will certainly be talking about them moving forward. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom. It's now raining, so I wouldn't recommend going out for a walk anymore.
Oh, darn.
But I don't know if it's raining in Columbia, but it's certainly raining in Reisterstown.
Not till 4 o'clock.
Not in Columbia yet.
Oh, it's pouring out there. I'm watching it come down in sheet.
Oh.
And I will see, just a reminder that the next time that I will be with you as a group is Lunch and Learn. We are looking at Talmud tales and Midrash, so you are welcome to join us Thursday at noon for Lunch and Learn. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you
much.
again, Rabbi
Thank you again.
Zamore, Rabbi Joseph. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Very enlightening.
Yes. Stay safe, everybody.
And
Thank
healthy.
you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was really great.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you to all of you for such great organizing.
Thank you.
Mary?
Larry wants to speak to you.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to let you guys talk. Bye-bye.
Okay. We're still broadcasting to YouTube Live, however.
Oh, yes. I'm going to wait a second. Let me fix that.